The air inside Fairview Federal Courthouse was thick with quiet certainty. Judge Stephen Whitmore, a man who had presided over cases like this too many times to count, smirked slightly as he prepared to deliver his ruling. He had long mastered the art of dismissing cases against police officers, especially when the officers were white and the victim was black. Today's case, in his mind, was no different. Across the room, Officer Bradley Carter and Officer Derek Shaw stood tall in their neatly pressed uniforms, their hands resting on their duty belts. Their posture radiated confidence, as if they had already been assured of the outcome. For them, this was routine, another minor inconvenience that would soon be swept under the rug. At the defense table sat Naomi Carter, the black woman they had falsely arrested. She was calm, composed, and poised in her navy blue blazer, her hair neatly pulled back. She had spent the entire trial in silence, letting her public defender, a nervous young man barely out of law school, fumble through her defense. The judge barely spared her a glance. She was just another defendant he would dismiss without a second thought. Judge Whitmore cleared his throat, gripping his gavel. This court finds that. Before he could finish, Naomi stood up slowly. Her voice when she spoke was cool, steady, and razor sharp. "Before you rule, Your Honor," she said, her tone slicing through the silence, "I'd like to remind the court that I am a United States attorney." A collective gasp erupted throughout the courtroom. Officer Carter flinched. Officer Shaw's smug grin vanished in an instant. Even the public defender turned to stare at Naomi, his mouth hanging open in disbelief. Judge Whitmore blinked rapidly, his face losing all color. His mouth opened, then closed. No words came out. For the first time in his career, he was at a loss for words. A murmur swept through the crowd as realization dawned on everyone in the room. The once predictable, quiet courtroom had transformed into a powder keg of tension. Naomi reached into her pocket and pulled out her badge and ID, raising them so the entire room could see. The golden emblem caught the light, gleaming under the fluorescent bulbs. Her lips curled into a knowing smile as she looked toward the judge. "I'd like to see you dismiss my case now, Your Honor." Judge Whitmore swallowed hard. His fingers trembled slightly on his gavel. This was not how today was supposed to go. It had all started 3 weeks ago. That night had been like any other for Naomi Carter. She had spent the entire day buried in work at her office in Fairview, handling yet another high-stakes case. By the time she stepped out, the sky had darkened, the street lights flickering on as she made her way home. On her way, she stopped at Sunrise Coffee House, a quiet spot in a suburban neighborhood. It was a place she had visited a few times before. A small shop with warm lighting and the rich aroma of freshly brewed coffee lingering in the air. Dressed in simple business slacks and a cream-colored blouse, Naomi looked like any other professional woman winding down after a long day. She barely paid attention to the 2 police officers sitting in their cruiser outside. That was until she stepped outside. As she walked toward her car, the sharp beep of a police siren cut through the night air. "Hey, you!" Naomi turned confused. Officer Carter and Officer Shaw were approaching, their hands resting on their weapons. Something inside Naomi tensed. She already knew how this was going to go. Naomi Carter felt the weight of their stares before they even spoke. The 2 officers, Bradley Carter and Derek Shaw, stood rigid, their hands resting near their holsters in a way that sent a clear message. They were in control. The air was thick with something unspoken, the kind of hostility she had seen before. She had been here before. "Ma'am," Officer Shaw said, looking her up and down like she didn't belong. "What's your business around here?" Naomi frowned. "Excuse me?" Officer Carter narrowed his eyes. "We got a report of suspicious activity in the area," he said, his voice flat. "You fit the description." Naomi inhaled deeply. She had heard those words too many times before. Suspicious activity always seemed to mean black person existing where someone thought they shouldn't. She exhaled slowly, forcing herself to remain calm. I just bought coffee, she said, holding up her cup slightly. I work in the city, and I'm heading home now. Shaw smirked. Got any ID? Naomi reached into her purse, keeping her movements slow and deliberate. She had no reason to be afraid, but she knew better than to make any sudden motions. Experience had taught her that black people reaching into their pockets could be seen as a threat. She handed them her driver's license. Carter barely glanced at it before flipping it shut. Got anything else in that bag? He asked, his tone dripping with suspicion. Naomi clenched her jaw. Just my wallet, she said evenly. And my work badge. Shaw snorted, his face twisting into an amused sneer. Work badge? What, are you a janitor or something? Naomi's fingers twitched around her purse strap, but she kept her face neutral. Stay calm. Stay in control. I'm a federal prosecutor. Silence. For a brief moment, both officers paused. Then Carter chuckled, a low, dismissive sound. Oh yeah? He smirked. And I'm the President of the United States. That was it. She knew exactly how this was about to go. Before she could even open her mouth to respond, Carter stepped forward. Put your hands on the hood of the cruiser. Naomi's stomach clenched. Not again. For what? She demanded, keeping her voice firm. Shaw reached for his cuffs, resisting an investigation. Naomi wanted to laugh at the absurdity of it all. Instead, she gritted her teeth as the cold metal snapped around her wrists. A few people had gathered nearby, watching the scene unfold. Their faces told different stories. Some looked concerned, others indifferent. No one intervened. As she was pushed into the back seat of the cruiser, her gaze caught that of a young black teenager standing on the sidewalk. His wide eyes were filled with a fear Naomi recognized all too well. He had seen this before. She exhaled slowly, forcing herself to remain calm. They had no idea who they had just arrested. The night she spent in Fairview Police Department's holding cell was humiliating in ways she hadn't expected. Even after she gave them her full name and credentials, they laughed it off. No way you're a U.S. attorney, the desk officer sneered as he took her fingerprints. Nice try, though. Naomi said nothing. She had spent her entire career prosecuting corrupt officers, exposing misconduct, and fighting for accountability. But this was something else entirely. She spent the night on a hard, cold bench, her arms crossed, her mind working like a machine. They had no idea who she was, and that meant she had the upper hand. By morning, she had posted bail and gone straight to work. The moment she stepped into the Fairview U.S. Attorney's office, her colleagues erupted in outrage. Jared Lawson, her closest friend and fellow attorney, nearly knocked over his chair when he heard what happened. You need to go public with this, he said, pacing the office, fuming. Naomi shook her head. Not yet. Jared stared at her. Not yet, he echoed. Naomi, they humiliated you. You're a federal prosecutor, and they treated you like some criminal off the street. This isn't just about you. This is about how many other people they've done this to. I know, Naomi said quietly. Jared stopped pacing, watching her closely. Then why are we not holding a press conference right now? Naomi turned to face him fully. Because I want justice, not just outrage. She wanted to watch them dig their own graves. So she waited. She let the officers lie. She let them build their case with falsified reports. She let them assume they had already won. And then, in the final moments of the trial, she would destroy them. She would watch their faces crumble as they realized who they had messed with. Jared exhaled, running a hand through his hair. All right, he said finally. So what's the plan? Naomi's lips curled into a slow smile. We let them think they've already won. 3 weeks passed. The officers sat in the courtroom smirking. Judge Stephen Whitmore twirled his gavel between his fingers, ready to dismiss the case. The moment had arrived. Naomi rose from her seat. Her voice was cool, steady, and razor-sharp. Before you rule, Your Honor, she said, her voice cutting through the silence like a knife, I'd like to remind the court that I am a United States attorney." The room exploded. Gasps erupted from every corner of the courtroom. Officer Carter flinched. Officer Shaw's smug grin vanished. Even her own public defender turned to stare at her, dumbfounded. Judge Whitmore's face drained of color as Naomi reached into her pocket and pulled out her badge. The golden emblem glinted under the courtroom lights. Her lips curled into a knowing smile. "I'd like to see you dismiss my case now, Your Honor." The judge swallowed hard. For the first time in his career, he was at a loss for words. And Naomi Carter? She was just getting started. The courtroom was frozen in silence. Judge Stephen Whitmore had ruled cases like this for years, too many times to count. Usually these moments were predictable. He would smirk, bang his gavel, and dismiss the charges without a second thought, especially when the accused officers were white and the victim was black. But this time something was different. Standing before him, Naomi Carter, the woman they had wrongfully arrested, detained, and humiliated, looked at him with unwavering confidence. Her voice was cool, sharp, and commanding. "Before you rule, Your Honor," she said, stepping forward, "I'd like to remind the court that I am a United States attorney." The air was sucked from the room. Gasps erupted across the gallery. Officer Bradley Carter flinched. Officer Derek Shaw's smug grin disappeared in an instant. Even Judge Whitmore, the man who had always held complete control, sat stiffly in his chair, his knuckles white against the gavel. He cleared his throat, but his voice was weaker now. "Miss Carter, that's U.S. Attorney Carter," she corrected, her tone razor sharp. A muscle in his jaw twitched. She watched the officers squirm. Her eyes flickered over to Officer Carter, who was suddenly shifting in his seat. Next to him, Shaw's hand twitched near his badge, as if it could still protect him. Whitmore hesitated. He was trapped. If he dismissed the case now, it would be obvious he was covering for them. If he ruled against the officers, it would expose the court's bias, his bias. For the first time in years, the power he wielded so carelessly was slipping through his fingers. Naomi took another step forward. "Your Honor," she said, her voice steady, "would you like me to repeat my request?" The silence in the courtroom was unbearable. Officer Carter, who had been so smug just moments ago, looked as if he wanted to disappear. Shaw was sweating through his uniform. Judge Whitmore's lips pressed into a thin line. Then, with a crack of his gavel, he snapped, "This court will take a short recess." Gasps and murmurs rippled through the crowd, but Naomi only smirked as Whitmore practically ran from the bench, his robe flapping behind him. The bailiff stood awkwardly, unsure of what to do. At the defense table, the two officers exchanged a look of barely concealed panic. Naomi turned away from them, walking toward the wooden railing that separated the attorneys from the audience. Behind her, Jared Lawson, her colleague and closest ally, immediately stood and followed her out into the hallway. "You fried him in there," he whispered, his voice tinged with admiration. Naomi exhaled slowly, rolling her shoulders. "I'm just getting started." Jared grinned. "The judge is scared." "As he should be." Shaw looked like he was about to pass out, Jared added. "And Carter? He's done." Naomi barely nodded. "They underestimated me," she said, her voice quiet but dangerous. She had seen it too many times before. People assuming she was just another black woman, someone they could bully, dismiss, and erase. But they had picked the wrong woman this time, and she wasn't letting this go. 3 weeks earlier, Naomi had already known what she was going to do. She sat on the cold bench of her holding cell, arms crossed, her mind working like a machine. She wasn't angry, not in the way they had expected. They had wanted her to lash out, to make a scene, to react in a way that would justify their actions. Instead, she was calm. They hadn't even bothered to check her credentials properly. She had told them she was a federal prosecutor, and they had laughed. Now they were going to pay for that mistake. The next morning, when they released her on bail, she walked out of that precinct with a slow, steady stride, like a predator stalking its prey. She hadn't gone home. She had gone straight to the office. Jared had nearly lost his mind when she told him. "They arrested you?" he had bellowed, his face turning red with anger. Naomi simply nodded. Jared had paced his office, running a hand through his graying hair. "Do they even realize what they've done?" "Not yet," Naomi said. She had watched as the arrest report landed on her boss's desk. Moments later, Richard Caldwell, the U.S. attorney, had read through the report, his face growing darker with every second. "They're going to regret this," he had muttered. Naomi had smiled. "Oh, I know." Back in the courtroom, the officers were getting nervous. Judge Whitmore hadn't returned yet, and the room was still buzzing from the shock of Naomi's revelation. Officer Carter leaned towards Shaw, his voice low and urgent. "This is bad," he muttered. "No kidding," Shaw hissed. "Why didn't we check her ID properly?" "Because she didn't look like a damn U.S. attorney," Carter whispered back. Shaw wiped a hand down his face. "We gotta get out of this," he muttered. "We need to talk to the judge." Carter's eyes darted around the room. He had expected this trial to be a formality, a simple dismissal, just like all the others. But now, there were too many eyes on them. And Naomi Carter wasn't just any defendant. She was the defendant, the one who could end their careers. 20 minutes passed before Judge Whitmore finally returned. His face was slightly red, his hands gripping the gavel with white-knuckled force. Naomi had a feeling he had spent the recess making frantic phone calls. Maybe to the police union, maybe to his contacts in higher places, looking for a way out. But there was no way out. Not this time. Whitmore cleared his throat, adjusted his glasses, and forced his voice into something resembling authority. "This court will now resume," he said stiffly. Naomi sat back down, folding her hands neatly on the table. "As I was saying before the recess," she said, her voice casual, "I expect this case to move forward appropriately." Whitmore hesitated, gripping the edge of his bench as if bracing for impact. Finally, he spoke. "This court will hear the motion for dismissal at a later date." A calculated move. He was trying to stall, hoping this would quietly disappear. But Naomi wasn't going to let that happen. She leaned forward slightly. "That's not acceptable, Your Honor." His gaze snapped to hers. "Excuse me?" "You heard me," Naomi said smoothly. "This case needs to be ruled on today." And she wasn't backing down. Not now, not ever. Judge Stephen Whitmore's nostrils flared, his fingers tapping anxiously against the gavel. He hated this. He hated that Naomi Carter was challenging him in front of everyone. For years, he had been the absolute authority in his courtroom, dismissing countless cases against police officers without a second thought. But now he was trapped. Naomi sat calmly watching him, waiting. She could tell he was on the verge of dismissing the case anyway, desperate to protect himself. Then, a voice rang out from the back of the courtroom. "Your Honor, we have new evidence." All heads turned. A man in a sharp gray suit strode toward the front of the courtroom, carrying a thick folder. Naomi's eyes narrowed. This was not part of the plan. The courtroom buzzed with curiosity, whispers rippling across the room. Judge Whitmore, clearly relieved for the sudden distraction, straightened in his chair. "And who are you?" he demanded. The man smirked, adjusting his tie. "Special Investigator Jonathan Pierce, Internal Affairs." Naomi's stomach tightened. Pierce. She had heard of him. A relentless investigator. The kind who didn't stop digging until he uncovered every last piece of the truth. If he was here, that meant this case was bigger than she had even anticipated, and she didn't like surprises. Pierce stepped forward, his confidence unshaken. Judge Whitmore, eager to seize control of the situation, cleared his throat. "Investigator Pierce, what evidence are you referring to?" Pierce's gaze flickered to Naomi. His smirk deepened. Then he placed the thick folder in front of the prosecution table. "These," he announced, his voice clear and commanding, "are newly obtained body cam and surveillance footage from the night of the arrest." The courtroom erupted with murmurs. Naomi's heartbeat quickened. Body cam footage? That was impossible. She had requested the footage before the trial, and the police department claimed the cameras had malfunctioned. Now suddenly the footage existed? Her eyes flicked toward the officers. Officer Bradley Carter was pale as a ghost, his mouth set in a tight line. Officer Derek Shaw shifted uncomfortably, his knee bouncing under the table. They knew what was on those tapes. Judge Whitmore cleared his throat, his eyes narrowing at Pierce. And where exactly did you obtain this footage, Investigator Pierce? Pierce smirked. An anonymous source. Naomi wasn't buying it. Which means Internal Affairs has been investigating this case behind the scenes, she said, her tone sharp. Pierce turned to her, his smirk deepening. You catch on quick, Carter. Oh, she really didn't like him. Judge Whitmore shifted in his seat, looking more uncomfortable than before. Pierce, he said carefully, his voice tinged with unease. Are you suggesting misconduct on the part of these officers? Pierce lifted a brow. Why don't we let the footage speak for itself? The courtroom buzzed again. Reporters whispered among themselves. Spectators leaned forward eagerly. Naomi crossed her arms, watching the judge closely. She could tell he was looking for a way out. There wasn't one. Play the footage, Naomi said before the judge could stall any longer. Whitmore hesitated. Then realizing he had no other choice, he nodded stiffly. Very well. A bailiff moved quickly, setting up a screen. A USB drive was inserted into the system. Within seconds, the black and white surveillance footage from the coffee shop appeared on the screen. Naomi clenched her fists. Then, the truth unfolded before everyone's eyes. The footage showed Naomi stepping out of the coffee shop, coffee cup in hand, purse slung over her shoulder. She was scrolling through her phone, walking at a normal pace. Nothing about her body language was suspicious. Nothing about her behavior warranted police attention. Then, from the side of the screen, a police cruiser rolled up. The audio crackled to life. There she is, Officer Carter's voice came through. She looks out of place. Naomi's blood boiled. Out of place. As the officers stepped out of the car, the footage zoomed in. Their conversation played loud and clear. Hey you, what's your business around here? Naomi watched as her past self turned around, confusion written on her face. Then came the moment that made her jaw tighten. She handed them her ID. Officer Shaw smirked. Got anything else in that bag? Just my wallet and my work badge, Shaw snorted. Work badge? What, are you a janitor or something? Then, a low chuckle from Carter. Nah, bro, look at her. Black woman, nice clothes. She's either scamming or she's a lawyer. The courtroom gasped. Naomi's nails dug into her palms. She had lived through it, but hearing it again, so clearly, so undeniably, made her stomach churn. On screen, her own voice came through. I'm a federal prosecutor. Silence. Then, laughter. Yeah, and I'm the president of the United States. Carter chuckled. Let's bring her in. She's probably got priors. More gasps. Someone cursed under their breath. The footage continued, showing her wrongful arrest, the way they twisted her arms, the mocking smirks, the way they ignored her protests. Then, a new angle, body cam footage. Taken from Shaw's perspective, it was shakier, showing his grip tightening around her arm. Carter smirked into the lens. You really thought we were going to believe that U.S. attorney crap? Then one final sentence muttered under Carter's breath. They always think they're somebody important, but at the end of the day, they're all the same. Dead silence. The footage cut out. The courtroom exploded. Reporters scrambled to take notes. Spectators shouted in disbelief. Judge Whitmore slammed his gavel repeatedly, desperate to regain control. But it was chaos. Naomi turned her head slowly toward Carter and Shaw. They looked like dead men walking. Sweat dripped from Shaw's temple. Carter's hands were shaking. They knew. They knew it was over. Pierce crossed his arms. Well, Your Honor, he said smoothly, I'd say we have all the evidence we need. Judge Whitmore's face was ghostly white. And Naomi? She just smiled. This wasn't over. Not by a long shot. The courtroom was alive with tension. Spectators leaned forward. Reporters whispered among themselves, their pens scribbling furiously. Judge Stephen Whitmore hesitated. He had no more excuses, no more options to stall. Across the room, Naomi Carter stood, arms crossed. She knew he was out of moves. "Play the footage," she said, her voice cool and commanding. Whitmore hesitated for half a second. Then, realizing there was no escape, he finally nodded. "Very well." A bailiff moved swiftly, setting up the courtroom's large projector screen. A USB drive was inserted. The screen flickered to life, and then the truth unfolded before everyone's eyes. The footage began with a clear shot of Naomi stepping out of the coffee shop. She held a cup of coffee in one hand, her purse slung over her shoulder. She was looking at her phone, scrolling absent-mindedly. Nothing about her body language was suspicious. Nothing about her behavior warranted police attention. Then, from the side of the screen, a police cruiser rolled up. The audio crackled to life. "There she is," Officer Bradley Carter's voice came through. "She looks out of place." Naomi's blood boiled. Out of place. As the officer stepped out of the car, the footage zoomed in. The conversation played out, word for word. "Hey, you, what's your business around here?" Naomi watched as her past self turned around, confusion written on her face. Then came the moment that made her jaw tighten. She handed them her ID. Officer Derek Shaw smirked. "Got anything else in that bag?" Naomi's voice, clear and steady on the recording, responded, "Just my wallet and my work badge." Shaw snorted. "Work badge? What, are you a janitor or something?" The courtroom gasped. A murmur of disbelief rippled through the spectators. But it got worse. A low chuckle from Carter. "Nah, bro, look at her. Black woman, nice clothes. She's either scamming or she's a lawyer." A collective gasp echoed through the room. Judge Whitmore visibly tensed. Naomi's nails dug into her palms. She had lived through this moment, but hearing it again, so clearly, so undeniably, made her stomach churn. Then the most damning part. On screen, her own voice came through. "I'm a federal prosecutor." Silence. Then, laughter. "Yeah, and I'm the President of the United States." Carter snickered. "Let's bring her in. She's probably got priors." More gasps. Someone cursed under their breath. On screen, the footage showed Naomi's wrongful arrest. The way they twisted her arms, the mocking smirks, the way they ignored her protest. Then, a new angle, body cam footage. The footage was from Shaw's perspective. It was slightly shaky, showing his grip tightening around her arm. Carter smirked into the lens. "You really thought we were going to believe that U.S. attorney crap?" Then a final sentence, muttered under Carter's breath. "They always think, they're somebody important. But at the end of the day, they're all the same." Dead silence. The footage cut out. For a moment, the courtroom was frozen. Then it exploded. People shouted. Reporters scrambled to take notes. The judge slammed his gavel repeatedly, desperate to regain control. But it was chaos. Naomi sat perfectly still, her jaw clenched tight. She slowly turned her head toward Carter and Shaw. They looked like dead men walking, sweat dripped from Shaw's temple. Carter's hands were shaking. They knew. They knew it was over. Special Investigator Pierce crossed his arms. "Well, Your Honor," he said smoothly, "I'd say we have all the evidence we need." Judge Whitmore looked ghostly white. He opened his mouth, closed it, then opened it again. His voice wobbled when he finally spoke. "This case will proceed to trial." Another explosion of noise. Naomi smiled. They had thought she was powerless. They had thought they already won. Now they were about to learn just how wrong they were. And she wasn't finished yet. Not by a long shot. The courtroom was a storm of voices. Some shouted in outrage. Others cheered. Reporters scrambled to break the news. But the loudest silence in the room came from the defense table. Bradley Carter and Derek Shaw sat motionless, their faces drained of color. They had been so confident, so certain. Now they knew the truth had caught up with them. Naomi Carter let the moment settle before she slowly stood. She adjusted the cuffs of her blazer, her movements calm and deliberate. Every eye turned to her as she stepped forward. Her voice was smooth, filled with unshakable steel. "Your Honor," she said, "in light of this evidence, I move to have all charges against me formally dismissed immediately." Judge Stephen Whitmore hesitated. He was trapped, and he knew it. If he ruled too quickly in Naomi's favor, it would look weak. If he stalled, it would look even worse. He had no way to save face. Everyone in the room knew it. Finally, he let out a heavy sigh, rubbing his temple as if the weight of the world had settled on his shoulders. This court finds that there is no legal basis for the charges against Ms. Carter. All charges are hereby dismissed. A roar of approval swept through the room. Naomi absorbed the moment. But she wasn't done, not even close. She turned her gaze to Carter and Shaw. "And now, Your Honor," she continued, "I move to have officers Bradley Carter and Derek Shaw formally charged with false arrest, misconduct, perjury, and civil rights violations under federal law." The room exploded again. Shaw jolted upright. "What? No, that's—" Carter jumped to his feet too, frantic. "You can't do that. We were just—" "Sit down," their lawyer hissed, yanking them both back into their seats. His face was pale, already flipping through his legal pad, scrambling for a countermove. But there was no countermove. The footage had spoken. Judge Whitmore gripped his gavel tightly. "That motion will need to be reviewed." Naomi stepped forward. "With all due respect, Your Honor," she said, voice cool but firm, "the footage speaks for itself. Officers Carter and Shaw committed perjury today. They knowingly lied under oath. That is a direct crime against this court." Judge Whitmore swallowed hard. Special Investigator Jonathan Pierce leaned forward, clearly enjoying himself. "I can confirm," he said, his voice smooth, "that Internal Affairs has already begun an investigation into both officers. And based on this footage, I'd say an indictment is inevitable." Carter and Shaw looked sick. The smug arrogance they had walked into the courtroom with, gone. Judge Whitmore looked cornered, but he had no choice. He slowly exhaled, then nodded stiffly. "The court will formally recommend an investigation into the actions of Officers Carter and Shaw." His voice was reluctant. It wasn't enough. Naomi knew that, but it was a start. For the first time since her wrongful arrest, she felt a real sense of justice, and she was far from finished. The moment court was dismissed, reporters swarmed. "Mrs. Carter, what are your next steps? Do you plan to sue the department? Do you believe this case will lead to policy changes in policing?" Naomi held up a hand, silencing the chaos. She met the cameras head on. "Let me be clear," she said, her voice unwavering. "This was not an isolated incident. What happened to me happens to Black and brown people in this country every single day. The only difference? I had the power to fight back." A hushed silence spread over the crowd. She took a step forward, her stare unflinching. "This is not just about two bad cops. This is about a system that allows this to happen without consequence. And I intend to use every legal avenue at my disposal to make sure that system is held accountable." Flashes of cameras lit up the courthouse steps. But Naomi wasn't posing for a headline. The fight wasn't over. It was just beginning. And this time, the law was on her side. The courthouse parking lot was eerily quiet compared to the chaos inside. Naomi stood by her car, staring out into the distance. The cool evening breeze rustled the trees. The adrenaline from the trial was still rushing through her veins. But now that the cameras were gone, reality was sinking in. This wasn't over. Not even close. Footsteps approached from behind. She already knew who it was before he spoke. You were a damn beast in there. Marcus Evans stopped beside her, shaking his head in admiration. I mean, damn, did you see Shaw's face? I thought he was going to pass out right there in the courtroom. Naomi smirked, but her eyes stayed on the horizon. Yeah, she murmured, but this isn't over yet. Marcus exhaled sharply. Oh, no doubt. The police union is going to come after you. The department's going to try to spin this. And don't even get me started on that racist-ass judge. Naomi finally turned to face him. Exactly, she said. That's why I have to move fast. I need to get ahead of them before they have a chance to regroup. Marcus nodded. So what's next? Naomi reached into her purse, pulling out her phone. I'm filing a formal federal lawsuit against the department. First thing in the morning. Marcus let out a low whistle. You're really going to take on the whole damn system, huh? Naomi's lips curled into a determined smile. The system came after me. Now I'm returning the favor. Marcus chuckled, shaking his head. Damn, I love this version of you. But just as the words left his mouth, Naomi's phone buzzed. Unknown number. She frowned, hesitated, then answered. Hello? A deep, unfamiliar voice came through. You need to stop what you're doing, Ms. Carter. Her blood ran cold. She straightened, grip tightening around the phone. Who is this? A pause. A friend who knows that people like you don't win against people like them. Naomi's heart pounded, but she forced her voice to stay calm. If this is a threat, I suggest you reconsider. Because I don't scare easily. A low chuckle. No, Miss Carter. This isn't a threat. It's a warning. Walk away while you still can. Click. The line went dead. Marcus frowned. Naomi, who was that? She inhaled deeply, her mind working at lightning speed. Then she exhaled. They just made a mistake. Marcus's eyes narrowed. What do you mean? Naomi turned to him. Her expression was unreadable. They just let me know. I'm getting too close. The black smoke curled into the sky like a battle flag. Sirens wailed. People ran in every direction, some ducking for cover, others frozen in shock. Naomi Carter stood in the middle of it all. Her pulse hammered, but her mind was razor sharp. They had bombed her car, her freaking car. This wasn't just a threat anymore. This was war. Marcus grabbed her arm. Naomi, we gotta go. This isn't safe. She yanked free, her eyes locked on the blazing wreckage. If she had been in that car just minutes earlier, no, she wasn't going to think about that. She turned sharply, scanning the crowd. Someone had done this. Someone was watching. Pierce appeared at her sight, on his face unreadable. You all right? He asked. Naomi let out a slow breath. No. Good, he said, rolling up his sleeves, because neither am I. Firefighters arrived, dousing the flames, but the damage was done. Somewhere in the chaos, the people responsible for this were watching. She turned to Marcus. Get my lawsuit filed. He hesitated. Today. She wasn't asking. I don't care if we have to walk it into the clerk's office ourselves. I want this on record before they try anything else. Marcus nodded. Consider it done. His voice lowered. Naomi, this is serious. You sure you want to keep pushing? She met his gaze, her jaw set like stone. They just tried to kill me. You really think I'm backing down now? Marcus sighed, rubbing his forehead. Yeah, figured you'd say that. Pierce checked his watch. We need to move. Now. Naomi nodded and followed him as Marcus fell in step beside them. What do we know so far? Pierce's voice was clipped. It was a remote detonation. Timed. They waited until you answered that call. Naomi's stomach twisted. A chill ran down her spine. That means whoever did this was watching you. Marcus swore under his breath. Pierce glanced around. Let's be clear. This wasn't a scare tactic. This was a hit. They weren't warning you. They were trying to erase you. Naomi exhaled slowly. Then they should have tried harder. As they reached the U.S. Attorney's office, Naomi barely paused. We go public. Pierce's brow lifted. That's risky. No, she met his gaze. What's risky is letting them think they can keep playing in the dark. She turned to Marcus. Get the press involved. Press? Marcus blinked. Naomi, you sure? They just tried to bury me. Her expression hardened. So now I bury them. The war begins at sunrise. The next morning, the sun had barely risen, but Naomi was already in the office. She hadn't slept, didn't care. This wasn't just about her anymore. This was about every single person who had been wrongfully targeted. She had spent the night reviewing case law, drafting her lawsuit, and preparing for war. And now it was time to strike. As she stepped into the building, a familiar voice called out, Ms. Carter. She turned. Jonathan Pierce was leaning casually against the wall near the elevators. Naomi folded her arms. Let me guess, you're here to tell me to back off too? Pierce smirked, pushing off the wall. Not at all. In fact, I think you should push harder. She arched a brow. Oh? Pierce glanced around, making sure no one was listening. Then he lowered his voice. I did some digging last night. Turns out Carter and Shaw have a history. Naomi's eyes narrowed. Go on. Pierce handed her a thin manila folder. Multiple complaints filed against them over the past few years. Excessive force, racial profiling, even an incident where a black teenager ended up in the hospital after one of their investigations. Naomi's stomach churned as she flipped through the reports. And yet, they're still on the force. Pierce nodded. Because every single case got buried, complaints disappeared, witnesses changed their stories. Evidence got lost. Naomi let out a slow breath. So someone's been covering for them. Pierce's jaw tightened. Not just someone. He tapped the folder. Judge Stephen Whitmore. Naomi's head snapped up. What? Pierce leaned in. Most of those cases went before his courtroom. And, surprise, surprise, every single time, he ruled in favor of the officers. Naomi clenched her jaw. She had suspected Whitmore was corrupt, but this was something else. So what are you saying? She asked carefully. Pierce met her gaze. I'm saying if you really want justice, he stepped closer, his voice low. You don't just go after the cops. You burn the whole system down. Naomi's pulse quickened. Pierce leaned back, flashing her an infuriatingly cocky grin. And lucky for you, I happen to have a match. Naomi slowly closed the folder. Her mind was already racing with the next move. She had walked into this fight thinking it was about two bad cops. Now she realized the entire system was rotting from the inside out, and she was about to set it on fire. But just as she was about to speak, her phone buzzed again. Another unknown number. Her gut told her to ignore it, but her curiosity won. She answered. A new voice. Male. Cold. You were warned, Ms. Carter. Her blood ran cold. You should have listened. A sharp click. Then, a loud boom. The ground trembled beneath her feet. The building's windows shattered. An alarm blared through the air. People screamed. Naomi spun around, just in time to see black smoke billowing from the parking garage. And right where her car had been parked, there was nothing left but fire and twisted metal. Marcus came running down the hall, his face pale. Naomi, what the hell just happened? Naomi's hands clenched into fists. She turned back to Pierce, her eyes blazing. They just made the biggest mistake of their lives. She inhaled, exhaled, then said the only thing left to say. Let's burn them down. The gunshot still echoed in Tasha Carter's ears. The reporters screamed. People ducked. Blood pooled across the courthouse steps. Officer Reynolds, her key witness, was dead. A clean shot, execution style. Marcus swore under his breath. Pierce's sharp eyes scanned the rooftops. Sniper, professional hit. Tasha's stomach twisted. They silenced Reynolds before he could flip, before she could get him to testify. This wasn't just about protecting Officer Daniels anymore. This was about protecting the whole damn system. Pierce grabbed Tasha's arm. "We need to get inside. Now." Tasha resisted. You need to stay alive," he snapped. He yanked her behind a pillar just as another shot rang out. More screams, more reporters ducking for cover. Marcus swore. "They're trying to send a message." Tasha exhaled slowly. Oh, she got the message, loud and clear. And she was about to send one right back. 30 minutes later, a secure room deep within the courthouse. Tasha sat stone-faced, her hands folded. Across from her, U.S. Attorney James Calloway, a man she had once trusted. Right now, she wasn't sure if he was friend or foe. Calloway rubbed his temple. "Do you have any idea what you've stepped into?" Tasha didn't flinch. "Yes." He sighed heavily, leaning forward. "Reynolds was our best shot. Now he's dead. Whoever's behind this is cleaning house." Tasha's jaw tightened. "Then we move faster." Calloway looked at her like she'd lost her mind. "Faster? Tasha, your car was bombed yesterday. A key witness was just assassinated in broad daylight. And you want to keep pushing?" She met his gaze evenly. "Yes." His nostrils flared. "Damn it, Tasha. These people play dirty. They don't just kill cases. They kill people." She leaned forward. "Then they should be afraid of what happens when they fail." A tense silence settled between them. Finally, Calloway sighed. "Fine, but if we're doing this, we need a new strategy." Pierce, who had been leaning against the wall, finally spoke. "We don't go after Daniels anymore." Tasha frowned. "What?" Pierce folded his arms. "Reynolds was the weak link, but Daniels, he's protected. If we go after him now, it'll be like hitting a brick wall." Tasha narrowed her eyes. "So what's the move?" Pierce smirked. "We cut deeper." Marcus let out a low whistle. "Oh, we're really throwing the whole grenade now, huh?" Pierce's smirk deepened. "Forget Daniels. We go for the man protecting him." Tasha's pulse quickened. He couldn't mean... Pierce's voice was deadly calm. "We take down Judge Stephen Whitmore." The room went silent. Marcus exhaled. "Ooh, we're really doing this." The courthouse was still chaos outside. Reporters, police, sirens. But inside, Tasha's mind was razor sharp. "We don't have evidence linking Whitmore directly yet," she said. Pierce smirked. "Not yet." Marcus leaned back thinking, "Whitmore's ruled on dozens of cases for Daniels. If we dig into his financials," Pierce nodded, "bet we find some interesting deposits." Calloway rubbed his chin. "You're talking about bringing down a federal judge." Tasha's gaze hardened. "No," she stood. "I'm talking about bringing down the whole damn system." Just as Tasha headed for the door, her phone buzzed. Another unknown number. Her gut told her to ignore it. She answered anyway. A new voice, male, cold. "You were warned, Miss Carter." Tasha's blood ran cold. "You should have listened." A sharp click. Then, a loud boom. The ground trembled beneath her feet. The window shattered. An alarm blared. People screamed. Tasha spun around, just in time to see black smoke billowing from the parking garage. And right where her car had been parked, there was nothing left but fire and twisted metal. Marcus came running down the hall, his face pale. "Tasha, what the hell just happened?" Tasha's hands clenched into fists. She turned back to Pierce, her eyes blazing. They just made the biggest mistake of their lives. She inhaled, exhaled, then said the only thing left to say. "Let's burn them down." The gunshot rang out before Tasha could react. Glass shattered. Blood splattered across the hallway floor. Erin Cartwright, Judge Whitmore's daughter, collapsed. Tasha barely had time to process it before Marcus yanked her back into the apartment and slammed the door. "Sniper!" Marcus yelled. Tasha hit the ground, her pulse thundering in her ears. Erin was dead. the only person willing to betray her father. And in Tasha's hand, the flash drive Aaron had just handed her. The last piece of the puzzle. They had killed to keep their secrets. Now Tasha was going to burn it all down. Tasha's fingers tightened around the flash drive. We need to move. Now. Marcus crouched beside her, gripping his gun. Tasha, they just assassinated someone outside your door. They're not going to stop. Tasha swallowed hard, forcing herself to think past the shock. This wasn't just about crooked cops. This wasn't just about a corrupt judge. This was bigger. They had just cut the power to her apartment. Then, a gunshot blasted through the front door, splintering the wood. Marcus grabbed her arm. We gotta go! Tasha bolted toward the fire escape. She shoved the window open, the cold night air rushing in. They climbed out onto the rusted metal landing, their breaths visible in the freezing air. Then, a black SUV screeched into the alleyway below. More of them. We're boxed in, Tasha cursed. Marcus pulled his gun. Then we fight our way out. Tasha scanned the alley, her mind racing. Then she spotted it. An old delivery truck, keys still dangling in the ignition. There, she pointed. Get in. Marcus didn't hesitate. He bolted for the truck, throwing open the driver's door. Tasha ran behind him. But then, a bullet whizzed past her, grazing her arm. She bit down a cry of pain but didn't stop. Marcus yanked her inside. She slammed the door shut. Drive, she shouted. Marcus punched the gas. The engine roared. Bullets ricocheted off metal. But then, they were gone. 20 minutes later, a deserted warehouse district on the outskirts of the city. Marcus killed the engine, breathing hard. That was too damn close. Tasha winced, pressing a hand to her bleeding arm. They're done playing games. Marcus looked over, his face darkening. They killed Aaron. They tried to kill us. Tasha met his gaze. Yeah, and that means, Marcus nodded, we end this, tonight. Inside the warehouse, they found an old office, dust, rusted metal. Tasha set up her laptop, her fingers trembling slightly as she plugged in the flash drive. The screen flickered. Then, dozens of folders appeared. Marcus whistled low. Let's see what's worth killing for. Tasha clicked the first folder. A list of names, her stomach twisted. It wasn't just cops. It wasn't just Judge Whitmore. It was politicians, businessmen, high-ranking officials. At the top of the list, Judge Stephen Whitmore. Marcus exhaled sharply. Well, Luppa. Looks like Aaron just gave us the entire playbook. Tasha clicked another file. Bank records, offshore accounts, wire transfers, millions of dollars exchanged for favors. Marcus shook his head. They're not just corrupt. They're criminals. Tasha's hands curled into fists. Aaron died for this. And now, it was time to make them pay. Tasha shut the laptop. We take this straight to the feds. Marcus nodded. Agreed, but we need to be smart. If we don't control the leak, they'll bury it. Tasha thought for a moment. Then we make it impossible to bury. She pulled out her phone. Marcus frowned. Who are you calling? Tasha's lips curled into a smirk. The press. Before she could dial, her phone buzzed. Unknown number. Her gut twisted. She answered. A low, cold voice. Walk away, Ms. Carter. Her pulse hammered. Or what? A short chuckle. Or next time we don't miss. Click. The line went dead. Tasha stared at the phone. Marcus watched her carefully. What now? Tasha exhaled slowly, then smirked. Now we make them wish they had. Judge Stephen Whitmore sat in the federal interrogation room, handcuffed, stripped of his robe, and reduced to nothing. Yet he didn't look afraid. Tasha Carter stood on the other side of the two-way mirror, watching him carefully. She had won. They had exposed his corruption, his crimes, his bribes. And yet, something felt wrong. Whitmore wasn't panicking. He wasn't begging for a deal. He was waiting for something. Beside her, Special Investigator Jonathan Pierce folded his arms. You want to go in first, or should I? Tasha exhaled sharply. I got this. She pushed open the heavy metal door and stepped inside. Whitmore lifted his head, his cold, calculating eyes meeting hers. Tasha sat across from him, placing a folder on the table. You're done. Whitmore let out a bitter chuckle. Am I? Tasha narrowed her eyes. You don't have an escape plan, Whitmore. You're not getting out of this. Whitmore leaned back in his chair, shaking his head. You still don't get it, do you? Tasha tapped the folder. We have the records, the offshore accounts, the payments, every corrupt deal you've ever made. There's nowhere to run. Then he smirked. A chill ran down Tasha's spine. Why wasn't he afraid? She leaned forward. Who are you protecting? Whitmore licked his lips. His eyes flicked toward the mirror. And then he laughed. You think I was the one in charge? Tasha frowned. You were at the center of everything. Whitmore let out a low, mocking chuckle. No, Ms. Carter. I was just a piece on the board. The real players? He leaned forward, his cuffs clanking against the table. They never sit in the courtroom. Tasha stood outside the interrogation room, fists clenched. Pierce watched her carefully. He's stalling. Tasha shook her head. No, he's not scared of prison. He's scared of who comes next. Marcus stepped forward. So what now? Tasha exhaled slowly. We go back to the flash drive. Pierce frowned. We already pulled the bank records. The bribes, the money trail ends with Whitmore. Tasha's jaw tightened. No, it doesn't. She pulled out her laptop and inserted the flash drive. Folder after folder filled the screen. Then she saw it, a folder labeled Eyes Only. Tasha clicked it open, and then her blood ran cold. Inside were surveillance photos of her apartment, her family, her colleagues, names, addresses, every person she had ever trusted. Marcus's voice was tight. What the hell is this? Tasha scrolled further. More photos, more names, and then a classified document marked Office of the Deputy Attorney General, Eyes Only. Tasha's heart stopped. The Deputy Attorney General? Pierce's eyes widened. Holy shit. Tasha stared at the screen. Judge Whitmore wasn't at the top. He was answering to someone bigger. Someone inside the Department of Justice. Tasha's stomach twisted. Marcus let out a low breath. If this is real, then we just exposed a conspiracy inside the federal government. Pierce folded his arms. This isn't about dirty cops anymore. Tasha looked up. No, this is about power. And now the people at the very top knew her name. Her phone buzzed. Unknown number. She already knew who it was. Tasha answered. A low voice came through the line. You just made the biggest mistake of your life, Miss Carter. She gritted her teeth. That's funny. I was just about to say the same thing. A short pause, then a slow, dangerous chuckle. You think you've won? Tasha's grip tightened on her phone. I know I have. The voice grew darker. No, Ms. Carter. You've only just started a war. Click. The line went dead. Tasha stood motionless. Marcus watched her carefully. Tasha? She finally looked up. Her voice was steady. We're not done. Pierce smirked. Good, because now we go after the real power. Tasha nodded. No more running, no more hiding. She had exposed the corruption. Now, she was going to destroy it. No matter how high it went, they owned the courtroom. The politicians, the businessmen, the elite, they had built this system, manipulated it, twisted it to serve their own needs. And now Tasha Carter had cracked it wide open. Her pulse quickened. She leaned forward, her gaze locking onto Judge Stephen Whitmore's. Give me a name. Whitmore studied her, his once powerful presence diminished. Now just a man waiting for his fall. Do you have any idea how deep this goes? His voice was low, almost pitying. Tasha clenched her jaw. I don't care how deep it goes. I'm bringing all of you down. Whitmore let out a slow sigh as if he pitied her. Then he said something that sent an icy chill down her spine. You should have listened to Aaron. Tasha froze, her hands curled into tight fists beneath the table. Whitmore's voice dropped to a whisper. They killed my daughter, Miss Carter, and they won't stop until they bury you too. The words sent a shudder through her, but she refused to flinch. Then they better be ready for a fight. Whitmore smirked, but this time it wasn't arrogance. It was acceptance. Or maybe regret. He exhaled, leaning back in his chair. All right then, he murmured. I'll tell you everything. The next day was a whirlwind. Whitmore gave up names. Not just corrupt cops, but politicians, businessmen, wealthy donors who had been pulling the strings for years. Tasha sat with FBI agents as they pored over the evidence. The corruption wasn't limited to one judge or one precinct. It was everywhere, across the country, across the entire justice system. Pierce whistled low, shaking his head as he flipped through a file. You just cracked open the biggest case in decades. Marcus exhaled, glancing at the documents in front of him. This is RICO-level conspiracy. Tasha nodded, but a knot formed in her stomach, because she knew they wouldn't go down without a fight. And she had just painted a target on her back. It came that night. She noticed it immediately, a black SUV trailing her from the courthouse. At first, she thought she was imagining it. Then she took 3 random turns. The SUV stayed behind her. Her pulse spiked. Then, a second SUV appeared, boxing her in. This wasn't intimidation. This was an extraction. Her grip tightened on the wheel. She slammed the gas pedal. The tires screeched as she cut through an intersection, barely missing a red light. Horns blared. Then, gunfire. Bullets shattered her back window. She swerved, heart hammering, her hands steady on the wheel. Not today. Up ahead, a police checkpoint. Perfect. She slammed on the horn, flashing her headlights. The officers turned just in time to see her car barreling toward them. The SUV skidded to a stop. The moment uniformed officers approached, they sped off. Tasha exhaled sharply, gripping the steering wheel. She had survived. For now. It was the biggest trial in the country. Judge Whitmore testified, exposing the rot from within. Daniels was arrested. Dozens of officers followed. The police union collapsed. The justice system, for the first time in years, had no choice but to change. For the first time, real accountability happened. And yet, Tasha knew. The fight wasn't over. Not even close. She stood outside the federal courthouse, staring at the crowd of reporters. Pierce walked up beside her, hands in his pockets. You did it, Tasha smirked. No, we did it. Marcus stepped forward, shaking his head. And now the whole world knows. Tasha inhaled deeply. For the first time in weeks, the weight on her chest lifted. Justice had won. And if they ever tried to take it back, she would be ready. Always. The story of Tasha Carter is more than just a tale of corruption and courtroom drama. It is a powerful testament to resilience, accountability, and the unwavering pursuit of justice. It highlights the reality that systems of power often protect themselves at all costs, even if it means silencing those who dare to challenge them. But as Tasha's journey proves, when one person refuses to back down, change becomes inevitable. One of the biggest lessons from this story is that justice is not automatic. It must be fought for, demanded, and defended. From the moment Tasha was wrongfully arrested, she could have chosen to let it go, to accept that the system was rigged against her. After all, many before her had faced similar injustices and were left without recourse. But Tasha refused to let fear dictate her choices. She understood that the only way to dismantle corruption was to expose it, no matter the risks. Her courage reminds us that silence is complicity. When we do nothing in the face of injustice, we allow it to thrive. Another crucial takeaway is that power is often abused when left unchecked. The police officers who falsely arrested Tasha acted with absolute confidence that they would never be held accountable. Why? Because they had been protected for years. Judge Whitmore had been covering for them, ensuring that every complaint disappeared, every charge was dismissed, and every officer involved in misconduct remained on duty. This pattern of corruption did not develop overnight. It was built over time, reinforced by a system designed to shield those in power. Tasha's fight reveals the ugly truth. When authority is left unchallenged, it becomes dangerous. It is our responsibility as a society to question, investigate, and challenge those who hold power. Because if we don't, they will continue to exploit it. The story also teaches an important lesson about perseverance and strategy. Tasha didn't win this battle through raw emotion or reckless actions. She won because she was patient, calculated, and relentless. She let the officers lie under oath, she gathered evidence, and she struck at the right moment. Even when faced with intimidation, assassination attempts, and threats, she refused to back down. This underscores the importance of staying focused on the goal, even when the road gets dangerous. Justice is not won in a single moment. It requires persistence, planning, and unwavering resolve. Finally, the story reminds us that real change is possible, but only when people are willing to fight for it. The corruption in this case was not just about two bad cops or one crooked judge. It was a system-wide failure. Yet, because Tasha refused to accept defeat, she forced that system to change. She proved that when injustice is brought into the light, it cannot survive. And perhaps the most important lesson of all, justice is not a privilege. It is a right. If you found this story powerful and eye-opening, don't forget to like this video. Your support helps to bring more important stories like this to light. Share this video with your friends and family so more people can see the truth about how justice is won. We want to hear from you. Comment below and let us know your thoughts. What do you think about Tasha's fight for justice? Have you ever witnessed or experienced injustice like this? And most importantly, subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications so you never miss a story that challenges the system and inspires change. Together, we can make a difference. Thank you for watching.